Good morning, everybody. I'm your host, Bishop E.W. Jackson, here on Wisdom Awakening. Wow, got a lot to talk about this morning. Want to still get to the word, but first, Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all counts yesterday. He was found guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. Go to my Facebook page. Go down a little bit, you'll find I posted the moment the verdict came down, and I said in effect the following. I am proud of my country. In spite of the bias that I think the public has been subjected to coming from the media, that it essentially says all cops are guilty of racism, all cops are guilty of hunting down black men, all cops are guilty of excessive use of force or police brutality. One would expect Derek Chauvin ought to be found guilty, period. There's no issue. Just take him out back and shoot him in the back of the head. I mean, basically, that's the attitude that the media has had. We all saw the tape. It was devastating. We all saw the video. It was devastating. But we have a criminal justice system that takes a dispassionate look at all of the facts and doesn't make judgments on the basis of one single piece of evidence. You listen to witnesses. You get other contextual information that puts the situation in its totality. You find out what went on before the incident. You find out what was said, if anything, after the incident, what was said during the incident, and all of that. The jury heard a lot of bias, probably before the trial even began. And then, of course, there are people like me who always want to give police officers the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean they can't do wrong, and that doesn't mean when they do wrong they shouldn't be punished. But those of us who support law enforcement are always looking for the best way of understanding what that police officer was going through, what he was dealing with. Now, I have to confess, I did not have any such sympathy for Derek Chauvin because I saw the tape too. I listened to some of the trial. Here again, because people are not perfect, it will fall short. And because you have some people who will just be straight up corrupt, it will not always produce a perfect result. But we have the best criminal justice system in the world. And I also said this, and I'll say it to you again. You know, the left has tried to turn George Floyd into some kind of hero. Well, he wasn't. He's a human being, and he certainly deserved the respect, the dignity, the proper treatment that any human being and any American citizen should receive. But George Floyd was not a good guy. He had problems. I mean, they say his body was riddled with fentanyl and methamphetamine. That is a powerful combination of two very powerful drugs. And apparently he'd been struggling with drug addiction for a long time. The police came because he was accused of passing a counterfeit bill. And he had a record. So George Floyd was no hero. But in this case, he was legitimately a victim because in spite of that, he was a human being who deserved to be treated properly. And I'll be very honest, folks. I'll tell you, I really believe that Derek Chauvin might have gotten off or had a hung jury if he had taken the stand and had been able to explain what was in his mind, what he was thinking at the time. I'm not saying he should have been acquitted. I agree with the verdict. Even if they had found differently, I would have supported the jury. That doesn't mean I would have agreed with the verdict. Juries can get it wrong. But they didn't in this case, in my view. But I think that if he had taken the stand and explained what was in his mind, why he behaved the way he did, and he had a reasonable explanation for it, he might have ended up with a hung jury. I don't know that he would have gotten an acquittal, but he might have ended up with a hung jury. But the fact that as a police officer, he couldn't take the stand and explain himself and say, look, here's what I was thinking. Here's what was going through my mind. Yesterday, my partner, I'm just making things up, but you understand, I'm trying to paint a picture for you. Yesterday, my partner was in a life or death situation where we stopped a guy and everything seemed fine, and then it went wrong and my partner almost got killed. Whatever. But the fact that he didn't take the stand means that even he didn't feel that he had any way to defend his actions. Now, the jury's not supposed to take that into consideration, but I do. I wasn't on the jury. I do. Because to me, as a police officer, he should have been able to take that stand and say, look, I obviously made a mistake in judgment, but here's why I made that mistake in judgment. See, because a mistake in judgment is different than cold-blooded killing. And I'll tell you something, folks, without that explanation, when you kneel on a man's neck for 9.5 minutes, and then you say to him, well, you're talking when he's pleading to be able to breathe, and you say, well, you're talking, you're breathing. And then he stops talking, and you don't say, oh, wait a minute, he's silent. Let me check. Let me see what's going on. And then you hear people say, hey, he's unconscious. And you'll say, oh, well, has he lost consciousness? Let me check. Let me see what's going on. And then somebody says he's not breathing, and you say, well, let me find out what's going on here. Is he okay? You don't do any of that? You know, it almost leads me to the conclusion that he wanted to kill the man. I'm serious. I don't hear many people saying that, but how else do you explain that? If he's unconscious, he's clearly subdued. You don't need to have your foot on his neck any longer. And by the way, let me also add this. I didn't say this in my comments on Facebook yesterday, but I want to say this now. I really believe that Derek Chauvin is 1 in a million. A guy who shouldn't be a cop, shouldn't have been a cop, should not have been a police officer. Or if he should have been at first, somewhere along the way something went wrong. Because I have seen it in news clips. I have talked to police officers about it. Even when a police officer injures somebody, they move immediately into trying to minimize that person's injury and trying to make sure that that person's life is saved. I think that's the way police officers think. There's just a situation recently where police officers had to shoot a guy, and they were busy trying to save his life, trying to compress the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to make sure that this guy did not lose his life, even though it was a justifiable shooting. Derek Chauvin exhibited none of that behavior. So I think he's 1 in a million. And here's the thing. I shared some data on my radio program. I'm going to get back to some of it today. Police arrest 10 million people every year. They arrest somewhere in the vicinity of about 2 million black people, about 4 million whites, and then others. Forgive the shorthand, but I don't have time to get into explaining all of that. I don't like those terms, but they're simple and easy, but you get my point. Out of 10 million arrests, less than 1,000 citizens involved in police confrontations end up dying. About 250 of those are Americans of African ancestry. About 500 of those, and I'm rounding these numbers off, but they're close. About 500 of those are Americans of European ancestry, and then there's a smattering of others, Hispanics and Asians and so forth, and people of different backgrounds. Less than 1,000 out of 10 million arrests. Folks, again, that's 1/100th of 1%. That's 1/1000th of the total number of arrests end in the death of an arrestee or suspect. 1/1000th 1/1000th. That is 1/100th of 1%. I'm assuming I got my math right about the 1,000th, but it's 1/100th of 1%. Folks, that is an infinitesimal number. And yet, people act like police are just killing black folks willy-nilly all over the country all the time, and it's just not so. So it certainly seems that way, yeah, because the mainstream media doesn't even publicize the death of a person at the hands of police who is not a person of African descent or Hispanic descent. It doesn't even make the news. So of course you get this view that, oh, police, look, they're out killing black people. They're out hunting down. So we've got another story that just emerged. A recent event. In fact, I think this just took place yesterday. Yeah, last night. Young lady named Ma'Khia Bryant was killed by a police officer in Columbus, Ohio, because a police officer arrived and she was wielding a knife trying to stab someone else, trying to stab another black girl. Now, we don't know the facts here again, and we don't know what happened. There's one story that a gang of girls jumped her to beat her up, and she used a knife in self-defense. But when the police officer arrived, she was going after, and there's video of it. Here again, you can't draw final conclusions based on a video. We know that. But when the police arrived, she was going after a girl with the knife, attempting to stab her. And she, in fact, I think she had cornered her up against a car and was basically about to drive the knife in, meaning that the girl who she had held at bay was in danger of losing her life. And the police officer fired. She's dead. And of course, already protests have begun and threats of violence are happening in Columbus, Ohio. If anybody's watching me from Columbus, Ohio, would you be a voice of reason? If you're watching me, you probably are in fundamental agreement with me. Would you be a voice of reason, or anybody from Ohio, period? Would you be a voice of reason and say, what was the officer supposed to do? Should he have simply stood by and let the girl kill the other girl? Should he have stood by, or should he have simply said, okay, I'll engage her in hand-to-hand combat. She's got a knife. I'll just go try to fight her. I mean, maybe some people would have wanted to do that. That's not what I would have done. If I thought that she was about to kill another person, I'm not going to go there and fight with her. She's got a knife and she's all charged up. I'm not going to put my life at risk that way. I'm going to shoot her. Now, maybe somebody else has a better solution. I don't know what it would be. But you know, we've got to stop turning criminals into victims. Now, I also said in my commentary yesterday, and by the way, here again, already, they're getting prepared for protests and riots and trouble in Columbus, Ohio. And once again, have you heard any outrage about the shooting of Jocelyn Adams in Chicago, sitting in a McDonald's, 7 years old, in her father's car, shot 6 times? Have you heard anything about, well, we're going to protest, we're going to say we got to bring an end to this violence that is taking the lives of children? No. Because her life doesn't matter. See, Ma'Khia Bryant's life matters more, because Ma'Khia Bryant was killed while trying to commit murder, perhaps, was killed by a police officer. And therein lies the quintessential issue. See, for Black Lives Matter, your life as a black person, my life as a black person doesn't matter unless I'm killed by a cop. to tell you the truth, with me as a conservative, as a Christian, Bible-believing Christian, if some black thug killed me, Black Lives Matter would spit on my grave and rejoice. They'd be glad because I'm in their way. I'm a voice in opposition to what they are doing. They don't care about black lives. That's a joke. And thinking people have got to get that through their heads. Here again, you compare the average 250 who die at the hands of the police. And remember, 10, in fact, data shows 8, 9, 10 of them are actually questionable killings. Questionable. Doesn't mean the police officer did anything wrong, but it means, okay, this bears investigation. There may be something wrong here. Folks, that means that 95% of those shootings are legitimate shootings. Like this one of Ma'Khia Bryant is a legitimate shooting because the girl was trying to stab another girl with a knife. I mean, we've got to stop making victims out of criminals or people who are doing dangerous, murderous, violent things, and the police come along and suddenly the police are the bad guys. This is very different than what happened to George Floyd. And my goodness gracious, we've got to be willing, we've got to have the courage to make distinctions where distinctions should be made. You know, I said yesterday on my program, 51, according to the Bureau of Justice statistics from 2019, 51.2%, that's down from 52%, which I think was 52% in about 2016, 2017. But it's down to 51.2% of the murders that happen in America happen at the hands of young black men. Now, I know that, there's this effort to try to paint white people as the perpetrators of mass murders, but 51.2% of the murders that happen in the United States of America happen at the hands of young men of African ancestry. I mean, think about that. Because black men in toto constitute 6% of America's population. In toto, all black men of all ages, 6% of the population. The ones who are committing the murders are about 10% of that 6%. About 1/10 of that 6%. That means you got somewhere in the vicinity of about 0.6, 0.7% of the black population committing most of the murders, and mostly to the tune of 94 to 96%, depending on which year you look at, killing other black people. How could you be shocked that the police are having more violent interactions with members of the black community? I mean, you've got to be thick not to understand that that's what's going to happen. It is in the nature of the case because there is so much violent crime happening in these communities. I mean, it'd be crazy not to understand that that's what's going to happen. But the police are smeared. All cops are bad. All cops are racist. Cops can't be trusted. And you get this stupid stuff that I read of people saying, you got to warn black folks. You got to warn black people. It's dangerous to be stopped by a police officer. That is the biggest bunch of hokum I've ever heard. It's just not true. I just gave you the data. 2 million arrests. 2 million. Here again, that's only of black folks. 10 million arrests in the country. And you got people running around, you got to give them the talk, because if you get stopped by a cop, oh, your life could be over. Well, see, here again, that is a formula for having people feel that they should resist police and disrespect police and fight police and even kill police. So you add those two, the level of violent crime and then the crazy rhetoric promoting this idea that police are somehow out to get black men, and you have got a very volatile formula, folks. A very volatile formula. And I lay that mess at the feet of these leftists and these Democrat politicians who are nothing but racial demagogues who are constantly stoking the issue of race. I just gave you the data. I just gave you the facts about what is really happening in the country, and it's not what the media is portraying. But they know this data. They don't care, because it's about manipulating people. It's about keeping people worked up, and it's about dividing people, and it's about staying in power, and it's about making people feel suspicious and paranoid and bitter and angry and worked up and expecting the very worst, so they can ride in and say, but we're your saviors from these racist police and this racist system. I mean, you had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I'm not sure what she's got between her ears, but it's clearly not a brain, not a functioning one anyway. But her and a few others, this is not, the conviction of Derek Chauvin is not justice. Justice is restorative. Lord have mercy. You know, sometimes I think there ought to be a negative IQ test to see just how dumb some people can be. Particularly people who portray themselves as so enlightened and so intelligent. I'm not talking about the average person. I'm talking about these elites who run around pontificating and dispensing their brand of wisdom and talking down to and lecturing everybody else. And they've got rocks in their head. Justice, in almost all instances, cannot be restorative. It cannot be. Well, then what is it? All justice seeks to do, all it can do, is try to compensate a person for their loss. That's all it can do. Your justice would be, and some idiot says justice would be George Floyd going home to be with his family. Well, George Floyd is dead. And that wouldn't be justice. That would be a miracle. And that would be Jesus Christ raising George Floyd from the dead. And the people saying this dumb stuff don't even believe in Jesus. So there's no chance that they would even pray or even think that that's possible. So why are they saying it? They're saying it to try to make everybody, again, angry, bitter, because you can't, what you really need, real justice would be, that's not justice. That's fantasy. That's why we have, in our civil court system, we award people monetary damages. Because look, if a loved one's been lost in a terrible accident as a result of someone's negligence, or a person's been injured in a medical procedure that a doctor should have known better than to perform in the way he performed it, and it was medical malpractice, or a company has dispensed, got these vaccines coming out, dispensed medication without the proper checks, without the proper tests, and that medication ends up causing serious damage to many, many people. You can't undo the damage. You can't undo the injury. If somebody has their home invaded, and they don't die, okay? But their home is invaded, and they're held up at gunpoint, and they're robbed, and then the people are caught. There is no such thing as restorative justice, because restorative justice would mean, in the view of these silly leftists, wiping out the memory of what happened. You can't undo the traumatizing of that person. They can get counseling, and they can have prayer. They can talk to their pastor if that person's a Christian, and they can certainly talk to God and ask God to heal them. But the system can't give them justice because it can't undo the trauma that person experienced. And these leftists come up with these silly concepts, and people just buy into it. We need restorative justice. No, justice is simply the best we can do. Excuse me, folks. Justice is simply the best we can do to compensate a person for their loss. And it's very imperfect. What did the city of Minneapolis do for George Floyd's family? Gave them $26 million. Now look, I am not going to nitpick on that. You can't measure a person's life and their value to their family. But I'll tell you, as a retired attorney, in civil rights cases, the compensation given to a family for the death of a loved one in some sort of accidental or negligent situation is based upon the potential earning power of that person throughout their lifetime. Yeah. You don't just pick a number out of the sky. So how do people get these multi-million-dollar settlements? Because sometimes there are punitive damages. In other words, damages that have nothing to do with the earning power of that person. It has to do with punishing the company or punishing the entity that is responsible for the bad outcome. And that's where you get these significant judgments or settlements that are all out of proportion to the person's earning power. So $26 million is apparently intended to punish the city or make the city pay for its negligence, I guess, in hiring Derek Chauvin or allowing him to be on the streets. That doesn't bring George Floyd back, but I tell you what, it certainly makes, I assume, I don't know who got that money or how that money was distributed, but it certainly made several people very, very wealthy. That's the best the law can do. Restorative justice is just, here again, anything the left can say to keep people worked up. And of course, we know what the bottom line is because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, this is not justice and this is not enough. We've got to change the system. These are Marxists who want to fundamentally alter the nature of our country. She said that. Barack Obama essentially said the same thing. And he's starting to look like a moderate compared to some of these crazy leftists. But he's not. He's just like them. He's just too cool for school. He's slicker than they are. He's more polished than they are. And he doesn't show his hand. But he's a Marxist too. Yeah, Barack Obama's a straight up Marxist. I'll tell you one thing I noticed though, just like Patrisse Cullors, he and his wife didn't turn down that $65 million book contract and say, oh, that's too much money. You know, there comes a time when you just have too much money. They took the money. Just like Patrisse Cullors apparently is looking for homes. I guess she was looking for some sort of multi-million-dollar estate in the Bahamas or somewhere. I mean, the hypocrisy of these people knows no bounds. I love this country. I'm proud of my country. And I believe that justice was done as best it could be done for George Floyd. His family got money. Derek Chauvin could get up to 40 years in prison. I predict he won't get 40 years, but he will get a lot of time. I think he's probably looking at 20 years in prison. So, because he was convicted on all 3 counts. So I think he's looking at a good bit of time in prison. And here again, I think he could have also helped himself there if he had gotten on the stand and explained what was in his mind and in his heart in a way that people could relate to. But the fact that he didn't take the stand means to me he didn't really have an explanation. I mean, if you were falsely accused, if I was falsely accused, and I'm on trial, I know the lawyers would advise against it, but I tell you what, it would take wild horses to keep me from getting up there and explaining, I did not do this, or here's why this happened this way. Here's what I was thinking when it happened. I want people to know what's in my heart. That I'm not a murderer, that I'm not a person who wants to hurt other people. He didn't do that. So, justice, as best justice could be done, has been done. And all this other stuff about we got to transform the system and America's still systemically racist. Give me a break. I have people say, I get up every day having to deal with the racism. You know, some of this stuff is so ridiculous that it's absurd. It's almost, well, like I said, racial obsession syndrome, it ought to be declared a mental illness because that's what it boils down to. This stuff is mental illness. It's a kind of obsessive compulsive disorder. I call it racial obsession syndrome. But people just act and talk crazy. And they can't be reasoned with because it's all emotion, it's all feelings. It has nothing to do with facts, truth, information. I don't get up a single day in my life feeling like, oh, I got to navigate the races today. I mean, that's crazy. You know, I get up and live my life and interact with people all day long. And I don't even stop to think about it. In fact, you know, folks, again, I'm going over my time, but I got to tell you this story, and then we'll get briefly into the word. There's so much stuff going on. I think I'm justified. I went several years ago to buy a golf cart, and I went to this golf cart store that is not too far from where I live. I walked in. There was a person sitting in a chair in the store, and you know there were some golf carts around the store and on the outside. And I didn't know anything about golf carts. I'm a little bit more conversant now because I've got one. But I didn't know anything about golf carts. I didn't know what they cost. I didn't know how they run. I didn't know anything about them. I mean, I've ridden golf carts because I played golf a little bit. I haven't played in many years, but that's an aside. The person sitting at the desk never spoke to me. So I kind of wandered around looking, and then I finally asked a question, and I got a very curt answer. Okay. I got asked another question. I got a very curt answer. And then a person who worked at the store walked in, walked right by me, didn't ask me what I needed, didn't ask me what I was looking for. Now, these folks happen to be Americans of European ancestry. I'm an American, obviously, of African ancestry. And you can imagine what went through our mind. Because I just thought this was weird. Do they have a problem with me? Now, they don't know me personally. They have a problem with the color of my skin. Well, what's going on? I finally left. So see, because that's the culture we live in. That's how we think. So it took time, and I wasn't in any big hurry. And I finally found another store. I went to that store, and I said, you know, I met a guy there, another American of European ancestry, just as nice as they could be. I mean, just really nice people. I just enjoyed dealing with them. And I said to this particular guy, I said, you know, I said, I'd gone to such and such a place. I said, but I couldn't really even get anybody to deal with it. And you know what he said? He said, oh, you too? He said, everybody I talk to, whoever goes there, has the same experience. It's almost like they don't want customers. And I realized it had nothing to do with race. These are just jerks. They're idiots. And he said he has friends who'd gone there and they just have a reputation. And he and I kind of talked. I said, is it a front, mate? He said, you know, I've wondered the same thing. Is it a front for something else? And they don't really care about selling carts? Because it is weird. He said, but everybody I know who's gone there leaves with the same kind of feeling like, man, these are some cold people. Well, here again, if you live in a highly charged circumstance where the left is beating the drum every day, it's racism, it's racism, it's racism, it's racism, it's racism. then the least little interaction that's negative, oh, see, they must be racist. And once again, it taught me, I could tell you about those kinds of experiences on multiple occasions. In fact, I will tell you another one. So, but you see, you could jump to the conclusion it's about race. It wasn't about race. These people were just idiots. They were just jerks. Might have even been up to no good, and therefore not really interested in customers because they were doing other things. I've done business with people, and later on to find out they were engaged in criminal activity. I'm not saying they were or are. I don't want anybody trying to figure out what places I'm talking about. But I'm saying, but you just never know. But what I do know is it had nothing to do with race. They're just people who didn't treat other people well, whoever they were. When I was a younger man, let me correct myself, younger man. I was a member of the Kiwanis up in Massachusetts. And I was in my mid-20s at the time. And I went into a meeting, and one of the city councilors, who I didn't know well, but I knew him relatively well. I mean, we weren't friends. We didn't socialize anything, but I met him, spoken to him. So I walked in, and he was standing at the door. And I walked in, shook his hand, and he says, how's it going? I said, going great. He said, atta boy. And I thought to myself, boy. I'm not a boy, I'm a man. And I tell you, I sat in the meeting and thought about that. See, I'm in my early 20s. I'm still working through my understanding of life as a Christian and really still shedding all the racial garbage that is shoved into us as a result of the experiences of our country and some of the bad things that have happened, some as a result of the propaganda that is spread. I mean, I thought about that thing and it just gnawed at me. Well, Kiwanis, some of you may be Kiwanis members, meets every week. So I went back the following week and walked in. This time I entered, it was several doors to enter, and he was in the same spot, but I didn't see him. But I had to pass by him, and I saw 2 or 3 people who happened to be Americans of European ancestry come in, and I saw him greet them. How you doing? And they would say, okay. He said, attaboy, attaboy, attaboy. He wasn't making a racial comment or a denigrating comment to me. That was just the way he talked to people. But you see, if you got racial obsession syndrome, and maybe I had a little taste of it at that time, everything is racial. Everything. Everybody's out to get you. Everybody's out to disrespect you. Everybody's out to discriminate against you. And at the same time, people don't want to then take responsibility for their own actions, as in the case of this girl who's wielding a knife and gets killed by a cop, as in the case of Michael Brown in Ferguson, who charges a cop at, 6'2", 6'3", 300 pounds, having already tried to wrestle the cop's gun out of his hands. Or Dwayne Wright, who is being arrested, and instead of submitting to the arrest, tries to break away and get away and goes into his car. I mean, without considering yet the merits of these circumstances. If a person would simply behave themselves, the outcome would have been different. But oh, no. It's racism. It's out to get the black man, out to get the black man, out to get the black man. Folks, it's going to tear our country apart if we don't stop it. And I'm committed to stopping it. I'll mention to you, because obviously I'm not going to get to the word today. But I promise you, I will. But this stuff that's going on in our country right now is extremely important, and it needs to be talked about. Go to our website, standamerica.us, standamerica.us, and click on Awakening Hearts and Minds. You will see the first part in a 2-part presentation of what we are doing, because we are going to go into these Black, Hispanic, Asian communities, and we are going to tell people the truth about this country, which, yes, has some ugly parts to it, but it's got some noble parts to it too. Some wonderful parts to it. In fact, part 2 of Awakening Hearts and Minds has an essay. It will be made up of 6 essays. It's got an essay on race. And when I get that finally ready for publication and it goes up on the website, you got to go read that. Because here again, it puts America into a context of world history. And that's what people are not being given. I've said, the left paints a picture like the whole world was this wonderful utopia where everybody got along and nobody mistreated anybody and there was no such thing as racism. And along came America and messed it all up. And nothing could be further from the truth. The world was a ugly, brutal, violent, racist place, even if they didn't call it that at the time. Because people were subjugated on the basis of any difference you could establish, even if their complexion was the same. And it happened all over Europe, it happened all over Asia, it happened all over Africa. And I put that into its proper context and then show that America is the most civilizing force of any nation that's ever existed on the face of the earth other than Israel. Israel I'd have to put above America because Israel introduced the world to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But aside from that, America's been the most civilizing force in the history of mankind. Because only America established itself on the basis that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, meaning all people, are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is such a powerful, inspiring, elevating principle. And I know that the naysayers, but we didn't live up to it. Well, you know what? Have you lived up to everything you believe or claim to believe? I mean, give me a break. But if you really believe something, as I do, for example, my faith in Jesus Christ, do I live it out perfectly? No, I do not. But am I constantly striving to? Yes, I am. So no, we haven't fulfilled that. But I really believe that most Americans desperately want to, now more than ever, and have for a long time. Let me end with this. And I can get emotional talking about this because I believe this and feel this very deeply. We live in a country of immense goodwill. We really do. I just told you the story about this shop I walked into. Do we have jerks? Sure we do. Do we have people who are pretty mean or nasty? Of course we do. We have 330 million people in this country. Some of them are not going to be very nice people. But I'll tell you something. I think the culture of our country, its Judeo-Christian roots, has helped this country be the most compassionate, the most decent, the most honorable nation that's ever existed on the face of the earth. I travel this country, and I've done that for years now. I started doing that with the Christian Coalition back in 1996. And I've been to every state in the Union except one, Hawaii. I've never been to Hawaii, but every place else I've been. Haven't been to all the territories, haven't been to Puerto Rico, but including Alaska, spoken in Alaska. I just have seen so much decency and honor and caring and compassion and concern. Nobody will ever convince me that America is fundamentally white supremacist, fundamentally racist, fundamentally wrong. And people who believe that, I've invited on multiple occasions, just leave. Just go somewhere else. And leave those of us who love our country, know it's not perfect, and want to help perfect it, but as a free constitutional republic, not as some sort of Marxist construct. Leave it to us to keep working that out, to keep making ourselves, striving to be a more perfect union. This is a wonderful country. And most of the time we get it right. Sometimes it takes us a long time to get it right, but most of the time we get it right. In that piece that you'll read, I talk about the fact, and I've really got to end, but I talk about the fact that America was never a white supremacist country. Somebody send this to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and Stacey Abrams and all these knuckleheads who are running around with this garbage packed into their heads from these Marxists that have indoctrinated them and inculcated them with a bunch of lies about the country. America's never been a white supremacist country. But wait, America had slavery. Yeah, America had slavery. But America also had opposition to slavery. I mean, there were Americans, and lots of them, who hated the institution, denounced it, and demanded that it end. How can you be a white supremacist country when you've got half the people prepared to fight the other half over its treatment of citizens of African ancestry? And folks, the Civil War didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a sudden occurrence that nobody saw. Oh, how did that happen? Wow, that's amazing. It was the culmination of decades of tension and argument. In fact, going all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, when certain states, namely South Carolina and Georgia, would not go along if Thomas Jefferson included in the Declaration of Independence a denunciation of slavery. And going back before that with the Quakers, and back before that with people who weren't even organized. There are essays by individuals denouncing slavery. Race was being argued about, and racism was being denounced in this country from its very inception. I don't care what this stupid 19 Project says and what lies it tells. And the great, infamous, I should call it, beating of Preston Brooks, beating Charles Sumner with his cane, almost beat the man to death. That happened several years before the Civil War, but it was just the bloody Kansas, all of that. It was all about an America that was divided, just kind of like we're divided now. With peoples, just like we got people saying America's rotten, America's no good, America's unjust, America's white supremacist, and you got people like me saying America's a beautiful, wonderful, shining city on a hill. And you had people back then, back in the antebellum South and leading all the way up to the Civil War saying slavery is wrong. It is against our values. It is against our founding principles. It cannot be sustained. We cannot continue to enslave other human beings. How about those Americans? Don't they get a part in defining who and what America is? So when the Civil War erupted, it was the culmination of a long debate that got increasingly more violent over the decades. That's not a white supremacist country. That's a country trying to assert its truest values and trying to stop or end an institution that many thought were against those values. That's my country. That's the America I love. And that's the true America. And these idiots who don't know anything about history and are running around talking about America's white supremacist country, they're ignoramuses. They don't know what they're talking about. That's it. I've gone way over my time, but I think it was worth it to have this discussion. And I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that you are encouraged that there are people like you watching and me speaking right now, and many millions of others across this country who agree with me and agree with you about who we are as Americans and what America is as a nation. Some people are calling this Christian nationalism. What idiots, Christian nationalism? Give me a break. Because I love my country. That's Christian nationalism. You know, these people, they really need to get a life. I'm serious. Just make up stuff and twist words and just I mean, nationalism, Hitler style, where you want to subjugate other people. Americans aren't interested in subjugating anybody. We're interested in living our lives, raising our families, running our businesses, doing our jobs, prospering, living the very best lives we can, trying to live lives of decency and honor and integrity. And most of us, many of us, trying to be ready to stand before God when the time comes and hear him say, well done. That's the America that I know and love. And nobody can tell me any different. And I think that the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial is proof positive that the America we know and love is still alive and well. And I encourage all of you, don't let people fill your children's heads or your relatives' heads without you speaking up with a whole lot of nonsense about how bad America is. You stand up, you speak up, you step up, you speak up, and you let them know, no, that's not the America. That's not America. That's your fantasy. That's your dark nightmare about what you want America to be, or what some people want America to be, so that they can fundamentally transform the country. That's what that's all about. One of my colleagues, I won't say who today, but remember, the Word of God is the basis upon which I analyze and look at issues. So I'm always, in one way or another, illuminating the Word of God, because I'm expressing my understanding of where we should be based upon what the Word of God teaches us. So remember, we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side.